Welcome to NTD News. I'm Jasmina Davis. Here are today's top stories. The State Department's Commission on Inalienable Rights' latest report sets out the foundation for U.S. foreign policy, the ideals of America's founding fathers. And Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says America is unique because it has capacity to champion human rights worldwide. The president spoke about his campaign to reduce government regulations. He says he's uplifting Americans by cutting costs for them, particularly those in lower income brackets. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she's confident Republicans will agree to a more expensive stimulus relief package. But the bill Democrats want is 3 times as much as what Republicans are suggesting. Changes to the Republican National Convention mean a limited number of delegates can attend, and for the Democrats, their delegate seats will be vacant, as delegates and members of Congress are told to stay at home. Texas removes over 3,000 cases from its confirmed case count. Local health experts say it makes the data more consistent and easier to compare. And the U.S. Attorney General is urging Americans to reevaluate their relationship with China. He lists details of what he calls the Chinese Communist Party's predatory and unlawful tactics to replace America and the world's economic superpower. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo speaking at the release of a draft report on human rights. He focused on how America's founding fathers understood unalienable rights and the role of governments in securing them.
The Commission was never intended to time the release of this report to the current societal upheavals that are currently roiling our nation. Nevertheless, the report touches on this moment, and so will I, because today's unrest directly ties to our ability to put our founding principles at the core of what we do as Americans and as diplomats all across the world.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Thursday marked the release of a draft report by the Commission on Unalienable Rights. Pompeo tasked the Commission in 2019 with assessing and advising the State Department on how America's unique rights tradition can inform its foreign policy work. In his remarks, Pompeo referred to the unalienable rights stated clearly in the Declaration of Independence, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. God-given rights adopted by America's founders.
These rights, these unalienable rights are essential. They are a foundation upon which this country was built. They are central to who we are and to what we care about as Americans.
Pompeo said that because America was built on this foundation, it is fundamentally good and has a lot to offer the world. But he said these rights and the understanding of them are under attack by outside forces and within the U.S. itself. He singled out the New York Times.
They want you to believe that Marxist ideology, that America is only the oppressors and the oppressed. The Chinese Communist Party must be gleeful when they see the New York Times spout this ideology.
Human rights violations in a number of countries were called out, including Nicaragua, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Iran, Russia, Burma, and North Korea. Particular emphasis was laid upon the Chinese regime, which was also noted by the chair of the Commission on Unalienable Rights.
China, in particular, is aggressively promoting a very different concept in which national priorities of various sorts prevail over the basic rights of speech, assembly, religious freedom, and free elections.
She said some powerful countries are openly challenging the idea that no nation should be immune from outside scrutiny of how it treats its own citizens. But the Commission's report disputes this and concludes that the United States should vigorously promote human rights around the world as part of its foreign policy.
President Trump gave remarks about his efforts to undo regulations. He says the action uplifts everyday Americans.
The Trump administration is once again taking steps towards a smaller government. The president delivered remarks on actions to get rid of government regulations. He described his regulatory relief campaign as uplifting Americans.
We're here today to celebrate and expand our historic campaign to rescue American workers from job-killing regulations.
Under Trump, 7 deregulatory actions have been taken for every 1 new regulation. It amounts to $50 billion in regulatory cost savings. The deregulation has lowered costs for Americans, particularly in lower income brackets. It has also boosted the American household income by over $3,000 annually. The president noted that the action further limits the government's power.
With each regulation we cut, we are not only returning the money and the power to our citizens, we are draining the Washington swamp, and they're not happy about it, I can tell you that. I think you know that.
Trump says the regulations imposed during the Obama-Biden era were excessive. Nearly 25,000 pages of federal regulations have been removed under Trump's administration. Over 700 actions were also taken to drop regulations that Trump says would have delayed the country's virus response.
Wilbur, thank you very much.
The Senate is set to return next week. Nancy Pelosi says she believes they can come to an agreement on a new stimulus relief package, and that Republicans will agree to a deal 3 times as much as they're considering now.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said she's confident Democrats and Republicans can agree on a new stimulus relief package. The Senate is scheduled to return from its recess next week. Pelosi told Bloomberg News she believes Republicans will agree to a package that's closer to $3.5 trillion. Republican leaders are considering a lower $1 trillion figure. The House passed the HEROES Act in May. Republicans have criticized the bill, saying it would allow illegal immigrants and felons to be released from prison.
Colleagues say
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said it would not pass the Senate. Republicans said the $600 weekly unemployment payments should end. They say it incentivizes people not to go back to work. The payments are set to expire at the end of this month. Under the HEROES Act, the payments would end early next year. McConnell also said any new bill will need to include liability protection for businesses and doctors.
Not even the presidential nominating convention is free from the force of the pandemic. Republicans are capping the numbers able to attend in Florida, and Democrats are choosing to stay at home.
Republicans are limiting the number of attendees at the party's August convention. Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel said in a letter, adjustments must be made to comply with state and local health guidelines. Virus cases are spiking across the state of Florida. According to a Republican source, numbers will be limited to approximately 2,500 of the regular delegates for most of the event. The nominating convention for President Trump's second term will take place partially in Charlotte, North Carolina, and partially in Jacksonville, Florida. The Florida venue for the final event day's speech has not yet been decided. On that day, delegates will be allowed to bring one guest. Alternate delegates will also be invited, bringing the crowd to around 6,000 to 7,000 people. The event typically draws a far larger audience. The changes come as the Democratic National Committee told delegates earlier this month not to plan travel to Milwaukee, for the convention will be conducted remotely. That includes members of Congress. A spokesman told The Hill that the DNC committee already sent delegates guidance on how to vote. It means the only aspects likely to take place on site include former Vice President Joe Biden's speech and that of his vice presidential nominee, which may take place on a different night. The event was originally slated for the week of August 17th in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
The CDC is extending its no-sail order for cruise ships through September 30th. It applies to vessels with 250 or more people that are in U.S. waters. The CDC says the virus affected about 80% of ships in just under 5 months. It says almost 3,000 passengers and crew members might have gotten infected by it. U.S. Attorney General William Barr asked American people and companies to stand together and resist the Chinese Communist Party's attempts at more influence. 80% of U.S. economic espionage cases link back to the benefits of the Chinese state. Barr says the regime uses a number of predatory and illegal tactics to try to dominate and infiltrate America and ultimately try to replace it as the world's superpower.
U.S. Attorney General William Barr expressed a sense of urgency for the American people and companies to stand together and secure Americans' freedoms and prosperity. Barr points out countless espionage, coercion, and censorship the Chinese Communist Party has forced upon American soil.
A world marching to the beat of the communist Chinese drum will not be a hospitable one for institutions that depend on free markets, free trade, or the free exchange of ideas.
For years, the communist regime has undermined America's free market system. One example, America's dependence on China for medical goods, which led to endangering lives during the virus pandemic.
The PRC hoarded the masks for itself, blocking producers, including American companies, from exporting them to other countries that needed it.
But it doesn't stop there. The CCP's influence on America's free market system stretches back even further. The U.S. used to be the world's largest rare earth producer, but since the 1980s, the Chinese Communist Party has infiltrated and dominated that industry. It comes at what Barr calls a dangerous risk of dependence, since America relies on China for about 80% of all imports.
Is America's top supplier, accounting for about 80% of our imports. The risk of dependence are real.
Along with the Communist Party's economic handle, Barr also points out the regime's censorship in entertainment, especially Hollywood. One of many examples is found in an American film, World War Z. The zombie movie's original plot included a virus that started in China, but the director had to cut that part out in hopes of stretching into China's market. And Barr says the Communist Party is censoring ordinary American citizens in everyday life, too.
Hollywood is far from alone in kowtowing to the PRC. America's big tech companies have also allowed themselves to become pawns of Chinese influence.
He encourages American people and companies to reevaluate their relationship with China. Because he says no one should underestimate the ingenuity of China. Barr says the fundamental character of the regime has never changed and isn't any closer to democracy now than it was during the Tiananmen Square massacre. Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Barr also drew attention to the fact that the regime hasn't changed since it hacked virus vaccine research labs, and that it's the same group that's funding the Confucius Institutes, which have popped up here with the intention of teaching American students the carefully managed history of the Communist Party. And coming up, NYPD officers respond to new laws. They say they are the ones feeling restrained. The police commissioner, among others, thinks the new laws have gone too far. And cooped-up New Yorkers rediscover an iconic Manhattan Park after it reopened with virus safety protocols. That and more after the break.
Hello there. Doesn't it feel like we're moving further away from the very values that our republic was built upon? And the media in our country has just been adding fuel to the flame, which is why you need to try the Epic Times. It's pure, honest journalism that's restoring traditional values, and it reports the news with no spin, no hidden agendas, and no false narratives. So if you want to know the truth about the FISA abuse that took place during the 2016 election, or how socialist and communist ideologies have been infiltrating our society, or how the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up led to this global outbreak, and so much more, then you need to check out the Epic Times. And for a limited time, you can try the paper yourself for a full month for just $1, and we'll send you a very special free gift. A giant timeline that's 3 feet by 4 feet, documenting the FBI's abuse of FISA spy warrants. So go to readepic.com and claim yours today.
Viewers have described China Uncensored like The Daily Show, but about China.
In China, something can be illegal, but still in common practice. For example, bribery, or intellectual property theft, or Uber.
At the beginning, I was super excited when I got 500 views, and now the show's grown to about 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. One episode reached 7.9 million people and counting. I'm a little freaked out that many people have seen my face.
Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? It's starring me.
It's more and more obvious that China is having a major influence on the U.S.
Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? 中国揭秘.
In 5 years, I see China Uncensored as the only show on TV or the internet. It will be the sole source of edutainment worldwide.
Have you heard of China Uncensored?
Yeah, I have.
You actually have? He's heard of China Uncensored.
I love China Uncensored.
The NYPD's police commissioner backed up another officer who said the force feels handcuffed. He says anti-police sentiment and other factors have made for a toxic environment in the city. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on that.
The police commissioner backed up another officer who said cops feel handcuffed under newly passed laws. One of those laws would criminally charge an officer if they place a knee on the suspect's chest or back in a way that compresses the diaphragm. The mayor acknowledged the NYPD's concerns before signing it into law. Commissioner Dermot Shea said in an interview with CNN that the city has gone too far.
And I think that we have gone too far. I think we've crossed a tipping point on many levels in terms of taking tools away from the police. I mean, that these last 2 months are just a completely different situation where it's a toxic environment.
Shea says factors like the mass release of inmates due to the virus and anti-police sentiment have made for a toxic, high-crime environment in the city. On Wednesday, 4 officers were attacked during a prayer and police march on the Brooklyn Bridge. One suspect lashed at a group of officers with a cane. Among the attacked was a police chief.
I just left a ComStat meeting downstairs where the chief and the lieutenant, 2 of the 4 injured, are sitting downstairs talking about shootings in Brooklyn and how do we get dangerous people off the street. Back to work.
Local reports say 2 men from the Bronx have been arrested for attacking a police lieutenant and officers. Miguel Moreno, NTD News, New York.
The virus case count in Texas is now lower by thousands. Numbers were removed from the total from San Antonio, which included probable cases that came from antigen testing. A local health director says it allows the state to more accurately compare testing results between Texas cities.
Health officials in Texas subtracted over 3,500 COVID-19 cases from their running case count. They removed probable cases from San Antonio that were identified by antigen testing that tests blood samples. They're faster but less accurate. The gold standard for testing is PCR testing, which uses a swab inserted into the nose. Only 3 cities in Texas are testing and reporting data by CDC guidelines, and San Antonio is one of them. The director of Metro Health said Texas wants apples-to-apples comparisons between Texas cities. San Antonio's mayor said they will continue to count probable cases, but they will be separated from the confirmed cases. An investigation by the Epoch Times found that testing data is diluted by the different ways states count virus cases and deaths. The Metro Health Assistant Director said the antigen test using blood samples is still considered an accurate positive. He said experts prefer it when testing large populations, and that it's still a good test to use in San Antonio.
New York's governor is sharing his experience fighting the pandemic with Houston's mayor. Governor Andrew Cuomo helped the city set up 2 new testing sites. The sites will be operating with more than 20 healthcare workers from New York over the next few weeks. They're helping the city respond to virus cases in Texas. New York State successfully fought the virus early in the pandemic, and it's now helping to fight it across the U.S. As America begins to reopen, some cooped-up residents in New York are enjoying one of the city's most unique parks again.
A few dozen New Yorkers strolled through Manhattan's Highline Park on Thursday, marveling at the lush gardens, city views, and lack of crowds. The park reopened with limited capacity after a 4-month shutdown. The 1.5-mile strip, built on an old elevated railroad that runs along Manhattan's west side, was one of a few city parks to close in March. The park's board of directors said the space was too narrow to permit proper social distancing.
Our main priority is keeping people safe, and so that's why we've done a few things differently. We're having timed entry, one way, and encouraging everyone to wear masks, of course.
The Highline used to be an unfamiliar sight to New Yorkers, who know it as a tourist haven since it opened in 2009. Now it's an especially welcome sanctuary for those recently locked down. A few people sunbathed on wooden lounge chairs, wearing masks and sunglasses. Others snapped selfies, pushed strollers, or read books in the shade.
I feel good. Seeing the trees again, walk around again, feeling the breeze. It's feeling like normal again.
Visitors now must make reservations to enter the park, under the new rules in place to prevent crowding, and can only move north after entering from the south. Once a hotspot for the CCP virus in the U.S., New York's daily cases have remained fairly stable in the last week, with a positive test rate of about 2%.
And hackers hijacked the Twitter accounts of a number of celebrities this week. They managed to trick people into sending them money, but luckily didn't use the accounts to do even more damage.
A series of high-profile Twitter accounts were hijacked this week. It was an effort to steal money from the account's followers. Among the hacked accounts were those of U.S. presidential candidates Joe Biden and billionaire Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. The hackers asked Twitter users to send Bitcoin to a series of addresses. 400 Bitcoin transfers were made, worth a combined $120,000. But according to one expert, the hack could have been far worse.
They could have sold this access to a number of places, for example, to foreign intelligence agencies. They could have used this access to announce a merger and acquisition in the name of Bill Gates or Elon Musk, which would have immediately affected stock prices.
Given that the hijackers didn't use the accounts for political means, it's unlikely the hack was state-orchestrated.
This was most likely an opportunistic hack, most likely done by some younger people, and this was the first thing they could imagine to make some money with.
Twitter's role as a critical communications platform for political candidates has led to fears that hackers could interfere with the upcoming presidential election.
The FBI said it was aware of the incident and that it has started its inquiry into the matter. Up next, southern China is still suffering from massive flooding, but Chinese state-run media is pushing propaganda to glorify the disaster. And German pork exports to China are down after the CCP virus ravaged Europe's biggest meat processing plant. That and more after the break. While flooding continues to wreak havoc on southern China, Chinese media outlets are pushing propaganda. Their reports only focus in on positive developments like quick emergency response times and beautiful scenery without covering the devastation. NTD's Juliet Song reports.
China is grappling with its worst flooding in decades. So far, almost 90% of China's provinces have been affected, while over 2 million people have been forced to abandon their homes. But Chinese media outlets seem to be beautifying the disaster and toning down the devastation. In Jiangxi province, one of the worst hit by the floods, a resident previously told us that the situation there is really dire.
We're in a very miserable situation. The embankments have burst and water is overflowing.
Others are trapped in their homes without basic supplies.
Now I don't have any food to eat. I don't even have any rice at home. What should I do?
Both residents live near China's biggest freshwater lake, Poyang, and have suffered from its flooding. The day the lake's water level exceeded its flood warning level, state-run media Xinhua News Agency posted a video online. In it, the outlet said as the lake's water continues to climb, parts of the road have been submerged, adding that the most beautiful road above water emerged as a result. In early July, when Wuhan was hit by heavy rain and flooding, state media posted an article praising the city's scenery after the rain. One Chinese internet user wrote an article to express his shock at the media's attempts to put a positive spin on the disaster reports. He wrote, "Our mainstream media is trying to create a beautiful world for us. In this world, the flood didn't damage any roads, crush any bridges or homes, or wash away any cars." A Hubei resident says he thinks it's one of Chinese media's characteristics. We've distorted his voice to protect his identity.
They can put a so-called positive energy spin on anything bad. To use a popular idiom, they can turn a funeral into a joyous occasion.
The Chinese Communist Party uses the phrase positive energy in its propaganda. It means to only focus on the bright side. According to the regime, crises, disasters, and criticizing the Communist Party would be deemed negative energy.
If disaster hits, the propaganda will always focus on the victory and success of emergency management. They won't talk about the suffering.
Mr. Liu said some Chinese people are very annoyed by the propaganda.
But there isn't a way out. Right now, China doesn't have freedom of speech. Many people who work in the media may not want to send out the propaganda, but they have to because it's required by the regime.
In 2017, Chinese leader Xi Jinping said state media outlets should spread and transmit positive energy. Another theme commonly seen in the so-called positive reporting is the use of drone shots. A senior Chinese media professional says they're used for a reason. In the article, he wrote, "Pain doesn't have a place in shots like this. When flooding comes, it destroys homes, drowns pigs or people, and their bodies are left to rot. When the water recedes, it leaves garbage everywhere. These are some pretty bad scenes, but they won't appear in aerial shots." Chin Han and Juliet Song, NTD News.
In China, questions are circulating online about where Chinese leader Xi Jinping is. Citizens are all too aware that he has not appeared in China's flooded areas. NTD's Tiffany Meyer brings us more.
For nearly 50 days, Chinese leader Xi Jinping hasn't appeared in China's flood-affected areas. His absence has sparked questions online about his whereabouts. Amid the questions, a set of unusual photos went viral in China. The first picture shows a billboard that features Xi Jinping's photo, accompanied by two local officials during an inspection in the region. The second picture shows 3 men wading through the waist-deep water as they try to rescue the poster attached to the billboard. The time and location of the incident couldn't be confirmed, but the text on the billboard indicates that it should have happened in central China's Hunan province. Similar situations are common in North Korea. According to North Korean media, in 2012, a 14-year-old student was killed in a flood while trying to rescue portraits of former North Korean leaders. Now we talk about another meaning of the phrase made in China. Here's an example of what you'd call solid as iron. A more than 700-year-old Buddhist temple in Hubei province has survived the test of time, and it's still holding strong despite the current historic levels of flooding. Now we turn to China's economy. China's National Bureau of Statistics has released the country's GDP data for the second quarter. The report shows a year-on-year increase of 3.2%, but except for the GDP, most other important economic indicators fell. Electricity generation, the most important indicator of industrial production, fell by 1.4% in the first half of the year. Investment in fixed assets also fell 3.1% in that time. Retail sales saw a decline of 11.4% in that period, and in June alone, retail sales fell 1.8%. The odd situation has prompted questions about why the GDP is rising despite the bad performance of other economic indicators. Zhong Dajun, the director of Dajun think tank and economic consulting company, told Radio Free Asia that disaster relief also increases the GDP. That's because large amounts of materials are transported and produced by various departments, which increase the GDP.
Germany's pork exports to China have been booming. That is, until the CCP virus hit Europe's biggest meat processing plant. NTD's Berlin correspondent Christian Watchen has the details.
Europe's biggest slaughterhouse in northwest Germany has reopened. 1 month ago, authorities shut the plant down after 1,400 employees tested positive for the CCP virus. The plant's operator, Tönnies Group, Germany's biggest meat processor, was widely criticized for its poor working conditions and hygiene measures. Amid declining pork consumption in Germany, pork exports to China have become increasingly important to German producers. Despite the impact of the pandemic on international trade, in the first 4 months of 2020, German pork exports to China doubled in size and tripled in value compared to 2019. In April, 1/3 of all German pork exports went to China. Since the 2018 outbreak of swine fever in China, demand for foreign pork in China has exploded, and prices along with it. China has lost half of its 440 million pigs and now imports 40% of all pork globally. Tönnies, China's biggest partner in the EU, has especially benefited from the boom. 20% of its revenue now comes from Asian sales. The CCP virus outbreak at its plant in June dealt a heavy blow to this business. China stopped all imports from the company, fearing transmission of the virus. Tönnies had big plans in China, including a joint venture with China's Decon Group to build a pork processing plant in Sichuan province. It would be Tönnies' first plant outside of Europe. The total investment is more than $500 million. The slaughterhouse would eventually be able to butcher up to 6 million pigs per year. It's unclear whether the deal is still on track. Reporting by Christian Watson, NTD News, Berlin.
Coming up, a global microchip maker saw a jump in profits last quarter. This after many predicted losses following the U.S. sanction on Huawei. And China says its economy is growing again, but behind the GDP numbers, there are still problems. Find out what they are after the break.
When you look at TV networks in America, a soundbite and fight-it-out culture prevails on news and commentary programs. As a Canadian, I'm fascinated with America, and I wanted to offer American thought leaders an opportunity to share their thoughts in a deep dive format, where we can explore their ideas together. And so American Thought Leaders was born. The world's most brilliant thinkers believed that open discourse was the key to greatness. However, all around the world, we see that discourse is being stifled and political agendas have subverted media. The Epoch Times launched its Global Thought Leaders program to bring back this great tradition of free thought. As the host of American Thought Leaders, every week I interview some of the most intriguing minds on the most pressing issues of our time. Be sure to check out our new episodes every week.
KFC is launching a new meal vegetarians might like, a plant-based version of its fried chicken. The faux chicken will be tested in a few dozen areas, including Los Angeles and San Diego. This meat-free product is produced by Beyond Meat and was tested in Atlanta for 1 day last year. KFC will analyze the results and decide if the plant-based food will become available nationally. Other companies, including Burger King, Dunkin', and Starbucks, also have plant-based meals. Analysts had a bit of a surprise this week. Taiwan chipmaker TSMC posted earnings that far surpassed estimates. The company used to be Huawei's #1 chip producer. Analysts expected the U.S. ban on Huawei to hurt profits, but it looks like TSMC was able to find clients elsewhere.
Apple's main chipmaker raised its outlook for 2020 spending and revenue. It's counting on strong global demand on 5G phones and high-end computing. The Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Co., or TSMC, is the world's largest contract chipmaker. It's now projecting more than a 20% growth in sales for the year. That's up from an earlier forecast for a rise in the mid to high teens. This week, TSMC reported net income of $4.1 billion for the June quarter. That's up from the $3.8 billion analysts expected. The chipmaker is seen as an industry leader because of its role in crafting silicon for high-powered computers and mobile devices. It signals the future for the rest of the industry. TSMC was the primary chipmaker for Huawei, but hasn't taken any new orders from the Chinese company since mid-May. Analysts expected the U.S. ban on the use of American chipmaking gear for Huawei would be a big blow for profits, but it hasn't been. TSMC's CEO told investors the supply chain will adjust. In order to drive production, TSMC will be increasing investment in factory expansion, and the company will add another $1 billion for spending on new equipment in its 2020 plan. This will take the budget up to $17 billion.
TSMC confirmed on Thursday a move to stop new orders from Huawei. The company says the decision complies with U.S. export regulations. American Airlines and Jetblue are joining forces to help deal with the dip in air travel demand. Under their new partnership, the airlines can now sell seats on each other's flights and share frequent flyer benefits. American Airlines is much larger than JetBlue, but JetBlue does have its own benefits. For instance, the airline has a strong market position in New York. It also has key routes between New York City, Boston, and Florida. China says its economy rebounded in the second quarter after a severe downturn due to the pandemic. But despite the positive signs, economists say there's plenty to be concerned about.
Chinese officials released the latest economic data. They reported 3.2% GDP growth for the second quarter compared to the same period last year. This is an improvement from the first quarter's near 7% decrease. But underneath the headline number, there's a wide range of problems. On top of the list is that Chinese officials tend to overstate GDP numbers. Also, as the Financial Times reported, the rebound was achieved by, quote, Herculean efforts from the state. China's central bank has injected hundreds of billions of dollars into its financial market, and the economy was struggling with overinvestment, a housing bubble, and mounting bad debt. Last week, China's banking regulator warned about the rise of bad loans in the near future, and last month the Chinese regime asked its banks to forego up to $200 billion in profits. The official release also shows in the first half of the year, investment by state-owned enterprises rose by 2.1%, while investment by private companies fell 7.3%. But this information was left out from the English press release. The pandemic also exacerbated the chronic underconsumption problem. On Wednesday, China reported its retail sales fell nearly 2% year-on-year, worse than analysts predicted.
Coming up, statue destruction like we're seeing today in the name of ideology has happened before. We take you to the days of the Paris Commune, the first communist revolution, to look at its legacy of destruction. And Russia is accused of trying to interfere in the UK's general election, while Russia is also accused of trying to steal CCP virus vaccine research done by the UK, US, and Canada. More on that after the break.
The coronavirus outbreak is the latest wake-up call.
U.S. Senator Ben Sasse put it plainly. The Chinese Communist Party has lied, is lying, and will continue to lie about coronavirus to protect the regime.
In 5 to 10 years, we'll have virtually no manufacturing capacity left for generic drugs. And again, this is 90% of our medicines.
And the world should know, if Hong Kong falls, the whole world falls, okay? Because the Chinese Communist Party is the existential risk of humanity, period.
Since the CCP took power, 80 million people have died from its policies and political campaigns.
They're using our institutions and our norms and our values against us in ways that we hadn't necessarily envisioned. towards their own authoritarian agenda.
From the party's great firewall in cyberspace, or to that great wall of sand in the South China Sea.
More repression, more unfair competition, more predatory economic practices, indeed a more aggressive military posture as well.
If we do not meet this threat now, it's going to define our century.
Russia is accused of trying to interfere in the UK's general election last year by spreading leaked documents. NTD UK's Neil Woodrow brings us more news from Europe.
Thanks. Welcome to NTD UK, bringing you UK and European news. Britain says Russia tried to interfere in its 2019 general election. UK Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs says that sensitive government documents relating to a planned UK-US free trade agreement were illicitly acquired before the 2019 general election. They were then disseminated online via social media platform Reddit.
There's a criminal investigation ongoing, so I can't say too much more than that. It is important to wait on the specific attribution, but we will reserve our right to take appropriate measures when we have the conclusion of that investigation.
A senior Russian lawmaker called the allegations more Russian nonsense. And continuing with Russia, a coordinated statement from the UK, US and Canada is accusing Russian hackers of trying to steal CTB virus vaccine and treatment research from universities and pharmaceutical companies. The UK's National Cybersecurity Centre says the hackers are part of a group called APT29, also known as the Dukes or Cozy Bear. The NCSC said it's almost certain that APT29 belongs to Russian intelligence. The statement did not specify which organizations were targeted or whether any information was stolen, but it did say vaccine research has not been hindered by the hackers. The Kremlin rejected the allegations. To Chinese paid ads, Adrian Zenz calls it scandalous. Zenz is a senior fellow at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation and an expert on Xinjiang re-education camps. He wrote a piece in Foreign Policy magazine on his research into forced sterilization of Uyghur women in China. Days later, Foreign Policy ran paid content from China Daily, a mouthpiece of the Chinese regime, accusing Zenz of being anti-China and spreading disinformation. Scandalous, wrote Zenz on Twitter. Paid advertisement in the same reputable magazine where I published my research slanders that exact same research. This is a common Chinese Communist Party tactic, using a reputable media to spread disinformation and discredit people trying to expose the truth of what's happening in China. Back to the UK. The UK's Court of Appeal says that Shamima Begum can return to the UK to fight the removal of her British citizenship. Begum, then 15, was a schoolgirl when she left London to join ISIS in Syria in 2015. She went on to marry an ISIS fighter and had 3 children, all of whom since died. Now 20, Begum is in detention camp in Syria and wants to return home. Her British citizenship was revoked on security grounds. The UK's Interior Ministry criticised the ruling and said it would appeal. Germany's Siemens is letting employees work from wherever they want for 2 or 3 days a week. Siemens says it's about allowing employees to choose the work locations where they're most productive. Chief Executive Roland Busch says these changes will also be associated with different leadership style, one that focuses on outcomes rather than on time spent at the office. Siemens is the first large German company to make permanent changes to how staff members work. The new model will apply to more than 140,000 employees at around 125 locations in 43 countries. To UK, despite England's hospitality sector reopened 2 weeks ago, the number of customers appears to be far lower than before the lockdown.
Brixton Village Market in South London is usually bustling with people eating out, especially at weekends. But now...
We were quite scared of coming back out.
In a poll earlier this month, more than half of respondents said pubs, bars and restaurants were reopening too soon. Low numbers could also be a sign that people's habits have changed.
I think a lot of people as well is cooking more at home.
But business isn't down everywhere. This pub in Hackney, East London, seems to be very busy.
If anything, we seem busier.
In a bid to get more people through restaurant doors, the UK government launched a $625 million discount scheme, offering half-priced restaurant meals from Monday to Wednesday in August. Many establishments have also cut prices, responding to a cut in sales tax from 20% down to 5%.
That's us for today from NTD UK Newsroom. Back over to New York.
Amid cries to pull down statues in the United States and Europe, one historian recalls what happened in Paris 150 years ago. Countless works of art, relics, and statues were destroyed in what's known as the Paris Commune. Our Paris correspondent David Vives has the story.
In recent weeks, the world has witnessed the toppling and defacing of statues like Christopher Columbus in the US and Winston Churchill in the UK. And there are calls to remove other statues of historical figures like Roosevelt, with activists linking them to colonialism and racism. In Paris and in all of France, not one of the thousands of statues have been toppled so far, though some have been vandalized. President Macron said in June no statues will be dismantled. But current calls to pull down statues, a trend fueled by leftist activists, mirror a time in history when the French capital suffered destruction on a massive scale. In March 1871, 40,000 radical socialist revolutionaries staged a violent coup in Paris. The rise in power of the Paris Commune was the first communist revolution. It lasted more than 2 months. Before being repressed by French Republic militaries, the revolutionaries set out on a campaign of destruction. According to Sorbonne teacher Eric Fournier, this is the most significant point.
At the very end of the Commune, the revolutionaries decided to burn the buildings because that fitted with their ideology of what they call purification of the public spaces.
This is what Parisians called the Bloody Week. French author Émile Zola wrote at the time, "It seemed the sky was burning with one huge red flame, the heat was unbearable, the air was unbreathable." Centuries-old artifacts, sculptures, buildings and statues were destroyed.
A total of 238 buildings were set ablaze, including iconic monuments such as the Tuileries Palace, which was the king's residence for 800 years, the Paris City Hall, Palace of Justice, and the Vendôme Column.
After the Commune ended, Paris slowly began to rebuild and replace many of its monuments. And since that time has passed, no building or statue has been toppled in the name of an ideology. In the words of Eric Fournier, Parisians are attached to the city's art and its statues.
I don't see anyone who would tear down the Vendôme Column today. You know, all these statues are like old bells in churches. Even if not many people attend the Mass, no one in the village wants to see them taken down.
After the Commune was over, sculpture continued to rebuild statues that embraced a neoclassical style. Some of them commemorate great men. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Coming up, more than 70 NFL players have tested positive for the virus, and Serena Williams will return to the tennis court. More on that when we return.
Hello there. Doesn't it feel like we're moving further away from the very values that our republic was built upon? And the media in our country has just been adding fuel to the flame, which is why you need to try the Epic Times. It's pure, honest journalism that's restoring traditional values, and it reports the news with no spin, no hidden agendas, and no false narratives. So if you want to know the truth about the FISA abuse that took place during the 2016 election, or how socialist and communist ideologies have been infiltrating our society, or how the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up led to this global outbreak, and so much more, then you need to check out the Epic Times. And for a limited time, you can try the paper yourself for a full month for just $1, and we'll send you a very special free gift. A giant timeline that's 3 feet by 4 feet, documenting the FBI's abuse of FISA spy warrants. So go to readepic.com and claim yours today.
Viewers have described China Uncensored like The Daily Show, but about China.
In China, something can be illegal, but still in common practice.
For example, bribery, or intellectual property theft, or Uber.
At the beginning, I was super excited when I got 500 views, and now the show's grown to about 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. One episode reached 7.9 million people and counting. I'm a little freaked out that many people have seen my face.
Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? It's starring me.
It's more and more obvious that China is having a major influence on the U.S.
Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? 中国揭秘.
In 5 years, I see China Uncensored as the only show on TV or the internet. It will be the sole source of edutainment worldwide.
Have you heard of China Uncensored?
Yeah, I have.
You actually have? He's heard of China
Hello.
Uncensored.
I love China Uncensored.
More than 70 NFL players have tested positive for the virus, and Serena Williams will return to the tennis court for the first time.
More than 70 NFL players have tested positive for the virus. It's not clear yet who the players are or which teams they play for. Serena Williams will return to the court for the first time since the start of the outbreak. She's going to compete at the inaugural edition of the Top Seed Open in Lexington, Kentucky. Tiger Woods resumes his hunt for a record-breaking 83rd PGA Tour win. Due to the virus, no fans are allowed at the tournament, something he described as a new reality. Real Madrid has clinched its 34th league title. The club won all 10 matches since the season returned after the pandemic timeout. Heavy police presence was seen around the city to prevent mass gatherings as authorities try to prevent a second outbreak.
A South Florida police chase ended with a kangaroo in the back of a patrol car. Of course, it was the kangaroo they were chasing in the first place.
After receiving a call about a kangaroo running loose, Fort Lauderdale police officers managed to capture him and place him in a squad car. The marsupial was taken to a barn where the agency keeps its horses. Anthony Macias, who claims to be the kangaroo's owner, said he had been hoping to bring his pet Jack home. But police told him the animal won't be returned because Fort Lauderdale does not allow kangaroos. Macias said he was at work when he learned Jack had escaped. Macias said he got Jack about 4 months ago from a Davie man who was moving and did not want the animal anymore. Officials weren't sure where Jack would end up, but Macias said he has friends in Palm Beach County who are permitted to house kangaroos.
Actor Chris Evans is paying tribute to a young boy who was seriously injured while saving his little sister from a dog attack.
This is a message for Bridger.
Evans sent a video message to 6-year-old Bridger Walker, heaping well-deserved praise on the boy. The Captain America star said he may play a superhero in movies, but Walker is a real-life hero.
So I read your story, I saw what you did. Now I'm sure you've heard a lot of this over the last couple days, but let me be the next one to tell you, pal, you're a hero. What you did was so brave, so selfless. Your sister is so lucky to have you as a big brother. Your parents must be so proud of you.
Evans is also sending the boy an authentic Captain America shield. Stars including Anne Hathaway, Tom Holland, and Hugh Jackman also reached out to the family. And with good reason, it really was a touching story. When Walker's dad asked why he got between the dog and his sister, the boy said, "If someone had to die, I thought it should be me."
And that's all for now. Catch us again at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm Jasmina Davis.
Just what does it take to get a Hollywood film screened in communist China? How has the Chinese regime subverted Hollywood into its propaganda apparatus? And why did a self-proclaimed globalist who managed to get Iron Man 3 screened in Beijing's Forbidden City have a change of heart and realize he was pandering to China's Communist Party? In this episode, we sit down with film producer and media executive Chris Fenton, who's worked on blockbuster films like Iron Man 3, Point Break, and Looper. He is the author of the book, Feeding the Dragon. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek.
Southern China is still suffering from massive flooding, but Chinese media is pushing propaganda. The Trump administration is reportedly discussing a travel ban against all Chinese Communist Party members. An analyst says the U.S. is in for a Cold War that might be harder than the one with the Soviet Union. The 10 prohibitions of Communist Party members' beliefs, this document stipulates what is and isn't acceptable for party members, including details of their personal lives. The U.S. Attorney General says 80% of U.S. economic espionage cases link back to China. He asks Americans to stand together and resist the CCP's attempts at further influence. And an investigation is underway into the risk posed by 2 Chinese social media companies. Both of them hold vast amounts of personal data from Americans, but are obliged to hand over their user data at the request of the Chinese regime. Tune in at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time and tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time to watch the full China in Focus.